to the webinar organized by International Affairs Division at Ambedkar University, Delhi. Taniya is an international visiting scholar associated with School of Liberal Studies, and she's a speaker today. Before we begin the talk, I would like to welcome Professor Radha Chakravarti, who is the Dean of International Affairs Division, to give welcoming remarks. Professor Radha.
Thank you, Parag. It's my pleasure on behalf of the International Affairs Division at Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi. It's a great pleasure to welcome our visiting international scholar, Taniya Lushinger, in our midst to talk to us about her work and to present her lecture before we open it up for interaction. It is a pleasure, especially because during these COVID times, such interactions have been few and far between. And I think this will be a very, very significant and welcome session for that reason as well. As far as Taniya's presence amongst us is concerned, as far as Taniya's presence here is concerned, she is here from the University of Zurich as a visiting scholar affiliated to the School of Liberal Studies under the mentorship of Professor Rukmini Sen. And she's here to work on her research project as a PhD scholar. And it is remarkable how she has shown determination and commitment to her project in spite of the difficulties faced due to the pandemic situation, as well as certain personal crises that she has had to face. And she is to be, I think, commended and admired for the commitment to her research that she has shown. And it has been a pleasure to have her here with us at Ambedkar University, Delhi. And in particular for us in the International Affairs Division, which extends to the outer world AUD's philosophy of promoting cultural diversity, heterogeneities, and interactions across borders. So in that sense, this event comes as a very welcome intellectual interaction from across borders, which I think will be very meaningful, and we hope to have more such events coming up in the near future, since we are expecting more visiting scholars here. So I will now welcome all of you and invite Professor Rukmini Sen. Perhaps Parag would like to conduct the rest of the seminar. So welcome again, Taniya. We're looking forward to your talk.
Okay. Before I invite Professor Rukmini Sen to introduce Taniya, let me just outline how the talk will proceed. So after the introduction by Professor Sen, Taniya will talk for about 30 minutes. And then we will open up the session for questions and answers. You can, if you have any questions that come up while you are listening to Taniya talk, then you can write them down in the questions and answers box. And later on, you can also raise your hand, and we will try to accommodate as many questions as possible. We want a lively discussion. So please feel free to ask as many questions as you think or they come to your mind. The livelier the discussion, I think it's the objective of having this kind of talk and a webinar. It kind of adds to the success of it. So before, without taking much time, let me invite Professor Rukmini to introduce Taniya. Professor Rukmini.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parag Vaknes and Professor Radha Chakravarti for facilitating through the International Affairs Division the visit of Taniya to our university. And as Professor Radha Chakravarti mentioned, it has happened, this visit has been possible despite the pandemic. And I'm sure, as we listen to Taniya and she talks about her, about her research work, at the back of at the background, we should probably still remember that the pandemic was going on as she was doing her field work, and as she was, constantly trying to get in touch with people here, both in Delhi and outside of Delhi. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Taniya to all of us. And as has already been mentioned, she is from the University of Zurich, and with the ISEC social anthropology department, with the chair of Professor Johannes Quack. And just to share a personal, note here, Professor Quack is somebody that I met when I had visited Zurich in 2018. And he's someone who has been working on India and about, religious movements in India, and in fact the science and religion question in India, to be more precise, for a long time. And it's wonderful that I've been interacting with one of Johannes's research scholars. Taniya has done her master's from the same university, and her master's thesis was titled, "Something Must Be Wrong with That Girl. That is why she's not getting married. Marriage pressure and the marriage decision-making process as an ethical undertaking." And my own interactions with Taniya in some ways kind of begun from there. And her interest in questions about marriage, questions about intimacy, and what happens when you probably, deviate, and what happens also when you both deviation, but also where does that lead to, a search towards some kind of a belonging. That is where my interactions with Taniya started, and it's extremely wonderful to see that today she is delivering her work. The title of her presentation today is "The Individual in Between: Negotiation of Belonging, Self-Conception, and Difference." We'll hear Taniya talk about her work. The only one thing that I would probably want to add here to in fact what Radha has already mentioned, in all the conversations that I've had with her, it's her constant determination and commitment towards her research questions and research objectives is something which I have continuously found. And I think that is something which is really, really valuable, which is something that we all look for and we try to do as we do our, PhD work, as we do our research. And it was wonderful to find that in all my interactions with Taniya. Over to you, Taniya.
So first of all, thank you all for this very warm introduction and welcome. And of course, the beautiful opportunity to speak now. I'm going to open my PowerPoint presentation and then we're ready to start. So I hope you can all see it. Good.
Yeah, visible.
Yes.
Perfect. So welcome to this work in progress presentation of my PhD project. Here's a short overview of what I'm going to talk about in this presentation. So first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and answer the question, like, how did I arrive at this topic? How did it develop over time? And then I will talk about my project, talk about some first findings, although I'm still in the research, like in the fieldwork stage, and patterns that I noticed. Talk a little bit about the methods I used and the challenges because of COVID. Tell you a little bit about the literature I used. Also, it's going to be very meager, but you're going to hear more about it. And then I'm happy to answer all kinds of questions. Yes, so about me. My name is Taniya. I'm 29 and I'm born and brought up in Switzerland. As was already mentioned, I did my BA and MA in social anthropology from the University of Zurich. And maybe to quickly explain my deep relationship with India, or rather with Delhi. So I came to Delhi the first time in 2017 to attend a conference at JNU. And I was mesmerized by the place, by all the interesting scholars I met and all the new things I learned, the new perspectives I got in touch with, and which led me to do an exchange year in JNU in 2018. And since then, I came to Delhi like every year. And in the last 4 years, I lived here for about 2 years. And Hindi bhi aati hai thoda sa. And so I ended my MA in 2019 with the master thesis that was already mentioned, like something must be wrong with that girl. That is why she's not getting married, marriage pressure and the marriage decision-making process as an ethical undertaking. Just to tell you one or two things about it. So like, obviously a lot had been already written about marriage in India, but I didn't find a study at that time in my specific field focusing on the kind of marriage pressure I witnessed to be so omnipresent among my friends and acquaintances in Delhi, which is why I decided to focus on marriage pressure, on the decision-making and the emotional atyajar that comes along with it. I looked at marriage pressure experienced by young women from the middle and upper middle urban class in India. And to me, marriage decision-making seemed to be a space full of ethical conflict. Like, so many parties are involved with so many different wishes and priorities. And a lot of the questions that these women were grappling with seemed to be of a very ethical nature to me. Like questions like, for whom do you marry? Do you marry for your parents? Do you marry for yourself? Why do you want to marry? Like, if you really ask yourself, or why should you marry at all? Is your idea of a happy life compatible with that of your parents who pressure you, while all of you want the same thing, you to have a happy life, but maybe the idea of what this happy life entails is very different? And yeah, what is the right decision to do, or the right person to marry, and so on. I was very interested in the ethical aspect of it. As a PhD candidate, I ended up at the social anthropology department at the University of Zurich, again at the chair focusing specifically on ethics, religion, and knowledge. So in that sense, like, it fit very well with my ethical interests. And now I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I came to that topic, which I'm presenting today. Yeah, so the supervisor of my MA thesis was as well Professor Johannes Koch, and he hired me as a PhD candidate, lecturer, and assistant at his chair like immediately after my master ended. So I had just finished my exams, and at that point I had no PhD topic worked out already. I just knew that I did not want to turn my MA thesis into a PhD thesis, and I wanted to work on something new or something different instead. Still, he hired me and told me, okay, you have time, I'm hiring you, and you find your topic, which I'm till today very grateful for. And that was actually the start of a very extensive search for a topic that took me about a year. I knew I wanted to work on something in India, because by that time I had also already like developed a big interest in India and grew very close to that place. And I came back to India several times in search of a topic. I was pursuing several topics at the same time, taking pre-interviews, meeting and interviewing different people, and engaging in a very extensive topic search. And at about the same time, or even a while before, I started to face a weird phenomenon in my personal life. Namely, after having lived one whole year in India, I kind of had some problems reintegrating into my Swiss life, so to say. And certain things I didn't see the same anymore. I couldn't understand anymore, or I would just work differently, like a lot of small things. And at the same time, I had also reached a point in my, let's call it my Delhi life, or the life I've built up over a couple of years there, where I hit certain boundaries, like where I couldn't adapt further. Like, because of my socialization, some things I just couldn't adapt to, while a lot of things so far had been easy for me to adapt. Like, I don't know, I couldn't get rid of certain ideas that I got socialized with. This struggle in these two worlds of mine, so to speak, got me interested in questions of socializations, of cultural differences, and of navigating cultural differences, like again with an ethical angle. And in conversation with my colleagues of the chair and a lot of courses and this and that, I came to the topic of binational couples, because I thought that like the space of between a binational couple, and there I also talked with Professor Rukmini Sen a lot, because it's close to what she works on, and it's like I felt like this is a good space where you have two people with two different socializations, and if they are from two different cultures, like there is a lot of negotiation, like which you could, a good space to observe that. I did a small pre-study in Switzerland because that was during COVID, so traveling was not possible at that moment. And I interviewed a couple of binational couples like I found in Switzerland. And there was one couple which stuck out particularly, and that was a Swiss woman and a young man from Iraq who had come to Switzerland as a refugee. In that pre-study, like I used to do it, like interview the couple together and then interview both of them separately, and then again interview them together. So when I met this man from Iraq in his individual interview, like I was very surprised. He spoke my local dialect like really well. He got himself an amazing job, and he was in a lot of his ethics as Swiss or as Protestant as it can get. Like he told me about a lot of moral conflicts he faced with his friends from Iraq that he had in Switzerland. Like, for example, about how to behave in public spaces, where he would always kind of represent the Swiss views against his friends who would like want to do things in a way like how they used to do it in Iraq. And he would say, no, 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 you cannot do this here, and things like that. The same was about the question of what women are allowed to do or not to do, or what is, yeah, exactly. And through which he realized, through these conversations, he realized that he had internalized a lot of the local ideas of Switzerland while through his process of living here. And when I asked him if he wants to go back to Iraq, he told me that he, of course, wants to go back and see his family, but he doesn't think that he can go back for long. He thinks that he has changed and that his way of seeing life has changed, and he probably couldn't readapt too well anymore. And I found this person's situation like very interesting. And after a while, like when I was analyzing like all these interviews from this pre-study, I realized that this pre-study has shown me more than anything that I am way more interested in individuals than in couples, which has further like brought my topic into another direction, because I realized I'm so interested in the biographies and the choices people take and the way they transform, like way more than in the couple. Around the same time, on one of my visits to India, I learned about a group called the Swagat Group. The Swagat Group is a group of German-speaking European women, so from Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, who all had married Indian men. So most members are today between 50 and 80, and most of them came in their 20s, which was back then in the 60s, or in their 30s. And by now, most of their husbands are already dead. But interestingly, the women don't go back. Like, on the one hand, of course, they have a life here, kids here, family here, they have lived for the last 40 years here. But on the other hand, they also told me that they feel they couldn't integrate anymore. Like, they have transformed. And it was very interesting to see like how they still don't really belong to Delhi. All of them live in Delhi, like how they don't really belong here. They are very clearly foreigners and stick out a lot. But at the same time, there are a lot of moments when there's belonging. They feel a certain belonging with India, which they don't feel with Germany or something like that. And all of these moments of belonging and non-belonging were constantly like discussed in the group when they have meetings once a month. So slowly I realized that all the things that interest me have this feeling in between two worlds, like in common. And I also decided to kind of follow my supervisor's advice. He kept telling me, like, you are coming back with all of these fancy topic ideas, which would make really good journalistic articles, but interests are more consistent than topics. So follow your interests, like really find out what you're always interested in. So that will definitely help you to like finish like a PhD over several years. And interestingly, I realized that at that point, already more than a year, I had my own podcast who was called In Between, where I was documenting my life and my life between two continents, like my search for a topic, when actually it was already called In Between and the topic was always there, the interest was always there. I just didn't realize it till that point. Yes, that was my journey to the project I want to present next. And yeah, at that point, of course, I want to say again that my field work and everything has been majorly facilitated through my affiliation with AUD and SLS. And of course, the support of Professor Rukmini Sen was really helpful, especially in the beginning, like when I just came here and started my fieldwork. And yeah, so as I told you before, so the working title at the moment, this might change, but at the moment is The Individual in Between, Negotiation of Belonging, Self-Conception and Difference. I want to start with a quote that captures what I'm interested in. In his book, Returning to Rhymes, Didier Eribon describes the coexistence of two worlds in an individual as the discomfort that results from belonging to two different worlds, worlds so far separated from each other that they seem irreconcilable, and yet which coexist in everything that you are. So this project aims to look at the state of being or feeling in between different worlds or contexts experienced by foreign as well as Indian individuals living in Delhi. I'm interested in the processes of identification as well as belonging through which this in-between position is negotiated. What implications does this in-between position have for the self and self-conceptions? How do individuals transform when engaging with a different context? In what way can going back feel alienating? How did such in-between positions come about, and how are such lives practically lived and reflected about today? I left it very open when entering the field, like what kind of an in-between I was looking for. Like I told everyone the in-between position can play out on different levels, like nation, region, religion, caste, class, education, or something entirely different. So I was very open when I came to the field. The aim of my project will be to describe and theorize this in-between in order to understand it better. And a challenge will be, and actually already is, to operationalize this in-between. And goals would be, on the one hand, to write a kind of ethnography of the in-between in whatever way possible. And on the other hand, to maybe contribute a kind of vocabulary to talk about experiences in between. Let's talk about the methods. So I'm using narrative biographic interviews on the one hand, like to understand how the in-between position of an individual came about, and also to have an overview of their lives. Like, yeah, I have used this method before. I really like it, and I've used it in other projects. That was why I immediately knew I wanted to use it. I added semi-structured interviews as well, to ask question about how does this in-between feel, like what exactly is alienating, which are moments where you feel a belonging or you don't feel a belonging, and so on. I combined it with participant observation to specifically observe how these individuals move in their new context, so to say, like when do I notice moments of belonging? Like when can they pass and when not? And when are there moments of rupture? And so observing things, like on the one hand, I had all the things they told me in the interviews. On the other hand, I could like observe and compare them with each other. And yeah, a big challenge was finding individuals who fit, because since I already had a big network in Delhi, I used snowball sampling, and that snowball sampling was complicated by the fact that all my friends, all my acquaintances, whoever I asked, like, do you know anyone who fits this description of being in between different contexts or worlds? Really, everyone said, like, interview me because I am in between. And it took me a long time to formulate, like, why certain in-betweens, like, let's say a job transition from one field, working in one field to working in the other field, or the transition of being a researcher and then becoming a mother, or many other kinds of examples people gave, why this is not the kind of in-between that I'm looking for. So I feel like in many ways, the beauty and the difficulty of this project is that everyone can relate. But eventually I found people that really fitted the kind of in between, like Eribons kind of in between that I was looking for. And I want to talk about them briefly because I also think since my topic is quite abstract, or has been, whatever I'm telling you has been quite abstract so far, I think it will get more clear when you get some examples of lives and of people. So what I'm going to present is a couple of people, but I'm going to do it in a very condensed and oversimplified way to not use too much time. So bear with me. And yeah, one example I've already talked about, which is this Swagat group, like the German ladies married to Indian men. And there's especially one lady, like the oldest one, that I got really close to. And yeah, for me, it was very interesting because exactly in this group, there are a lot of discussions about belonging and not belonging, or questions like, what is home? And where I feel like I see exactly this in between kind of being negotiated or like discussed in front of me. I have 3 more individuals that I want to present to you. And of course, I anonymized everything, like I changed their names and changed some other details. The first person I call Adil. He is comes from a Muslim background. He has a madrasa education, and he has a lot of prestige in his community and in his village because he's a very talented public speaker. He used to give sermons for thousands of people, and whenever he came home with the bus, people would come and run and greet him and like shake his hand and everything. And his in-between position kind of started when he went to Delhi to study in a big university, where he studied Arabic, which he already knew from his madrasa education. And during the course of his studies, he got kind of transformed there. He met a lot of very leftist, very woke people. He became an avid feminist himself and an agnostic. And today, on the one hand, for his very left and progressive friends, he somehow still remains the Muslim guy, or that guy without the same cultural capital that they have. While in his village, or for his believing Muslim friends, like he's now not Muslim enough anymore. So for him, it's like he has a lot of prestige in one world, and he gave up all of it to kind of follow some new ideas and some new inclinations he found in this other world of this university space, and in Delhi, where he lives and interacts with his friends every day. But somehow he still doesn't completely belong there, but he can't go back anymore because he feels a lot of alienation about certain ways of living that he now feels he can't follow anymore. So that is his in-between story. There's another person, the second person I want to talk to you about, I call him Suresh. He is a lower caste guy who was sent to good schools. So he was sent to English medium schools, unlike all of his lower caste peers. With his new peers in these other schools, he acquired a lot of their taste and preferences and their attitudes of his upper caste peers. And somehow till today, he feels he cannot connect to a lot of his lower caste peers anymore, be it on the level of education, of taste, of different experiences they had. And in many ways, he feels like he is not a typical lower caste, or his story is not a typical lower caste story, because as he says himself, he was too privileged. He doesn't want to hijack like some suffering which makes up a lot of lower caste lives, like experiences which he never had. So he doesn't want to kind of hijack that. But so he doesn't really see himself as a lower caste. And when people meet him, they don't realize that he's lower caste because his name is ambiguous, and also his attitudes, his English, the way he talks, like everything, people always think he's upper caste. But at the same time, he will never be upper caste. He will never be completely let in. That's what he keeps telling me. And there are a lot of moments where he's kind of scared that people will not respect him anymore once they find out he's a Dalit. So it's very, I don't know, he moves between these big tags where he doesn't really fit anywhere and is kind of constantly in between. And the last person I want to talk about, I call her Viviana. She's a European woman in her 30s who studied in India for 6 years. And she is the most Indianized European, if I can say it like that I've ever met. Like, she speaks perfect Hindi. Like, she has the proper habitus and behavior of an upper class Punjabi woman. And she passes as Indian whenever she wants to. Of course, she has the looks that let her pass as Indian, but more than this, it's her body language, her Hindi, like it's all of that. By now, she says she connects better with Indians than Europeans, and she doesn't see herself back in Europe anymore because India has been, she cannot think of a life where India doesn't play a role because India has become so much home for her. At the same time, she is not Indian, her passport is not Indian, and probably will never be. And she's in this extreme, intense love-hate relationship with India because there's certain things she doesn't seem to be able to accept even after so many years, and there's other things she loves and works with way better than with how things work at home. So she's also in some way in between. I hope these examples have helped you a little bit to picture what it's about and made it less abstract. And I want to go now and talk about challenges. Of course, since I work very extensively with few individuals, I face normal challenges of any field worker. Like, for example, the boundaries between being friends and the researcher. A lot of times people forget that we're not only friends, but I'm also doing research like with you. And that is very difficult. Or people tell me things. By now, all the friends of my research informants know about that study which I'm doing and they all want to read it. But then when my research informants tell me very personal stuff which they have not told their friends, so I see a lot of ethical questions coming to me when my writing process starts. So yeah, and apart from these very normal challenges of any field worker, of course, COVID did not make my research easier. Especially the lockdown in April, May was very difficult because I couldn't meet anyone. And at one point, like everyone I knew had COVID and I was like alone in my flat. And I received a lot of pressure from my university and my family to come back because they were scared. And at the same time, at some point I thought, right now there's no interviews I can take, no participant observation, like nothing I couldn't take like from at home in Switzerland, like in a safe environment when the numbers were low there, the COVID numbers. And I then decided to go back and I applied for like an extension of my affiliation and my research time, which I got and which I'm still very grateful for. And COVID was also a very special situation for all of my informants, because if you think of people who feel at home in two contexts, two worlds, or have two homes, for a lot of them, they couldn't go home to one place in a long time, which of course shaped their perspectives. On the other hand, some of them got locked up in one of their two homes, which again shaped their perspectives, like in some ways. And for a lot of them, their social lives were not the same anymore, because many of them had very vivid social lives, but they were like reduced to a minimum, like after COVID, or when things were just slowly opening again. And as a researcher, I found it very interesting you feel like you're part in their lives when things are not normal, or you feel like you cannot research the normal right now because it is not normal. So like, is this representative what you're researching, and so on. So a lot of these questions. And of course, things like traveling or getting a visa, all of this was made difficult by the pandemic. Then let's talk very briefly about literature. So these are some of the sources that I used for my proposal, but to be honest, I read a lot about binational couples, about other in-betweens, about migration and refugees and expats and second-generation migrants. And I read a lot of things like to kind of understand where is a gap, where can I make a contribution. But I also feel a lot of the things that I read are now not directly relevant anymore. And I also think that what is relevant, like in terms of literature and theory, I will only know when my fieldwork is completed, because before I went to the field, I didn't even know what kind of people I would be finding. So in that sense, it was hard to prepare literature-wise. And there's also the thing that the way my supervisor wants me to approach things is that he thinks that theory is supposed to be the last thing that is being added. So of course you read literature, you get an overview, you see where is a gap, where can you make a contribution. But he keeps telling me that theory should be the last thing, and that you only know what you write your thesis about when 70% is already written. And I think it's very true. So I made the same experience when I was writing my master thesis. So, and I'm won't be surprised if that happens again. And yeah, that's why this is a very thin account of literature, and I cannot extensively talk about it just yet, also because I'm in the fieldwork period right now and not in the reading period. Let's talk very quickly about some patterns and first findings that I noticed. So one interesting thing is that already the three individuals that I presented to you, they are so different. Their life stories are so different, the places where they are in life. But still, I see a lot of similarities, which gives me the feeling that there really is some kind of in-between feeling that is like common to all of them. I noticed that passing as something or passing as a person fitting in a certain context is like a big thing for a lot of people. Be it for Viviana passing as Indian or for Suresh like passing as upper caste. And it's very interesting. A lot of these people do that with a lot of virtuosity, like the way they shift and they adapt their habitus to wherever they are. And it's a very interesting process to observe. Another thing which is important to all of them is respect, like getting respect in the new context where they have become part of and feel a certain belonging. But again, there are so many moments of rupture where they feel like they don't belong. And yeah, so respect is important. Hierarchies are important. Again, very interesting how someone like Viviana specifically uses caste and class to find a certain niche or a certain community in the Indian context where she creates a belonging for herself and then acts that out. While someone like Suresh tries to escape the caste system and certain hierarchies constantly. And another thing is loneliness. So all of these people feel a certain kind of loneliness because not that they are not surrounded by people, but like a mental kind of loneliness because they feel that no one understands the situation. There's no one else who is specifically between these two specific worlds, which makes them feel kind of lonely sometimes. So no one else knows both worlds and understands them and feels a belonging. Another thing is alienation, of course, a certain alienation when going back into one of the contexts and really realizing on small little occasions that they have changed or transformed. And one interesting thing was that I came up with this word of in between. So from the beginning on, I came with this word, but at some point I asked all of them, did you ever have your own word like to explain your situation or to think about yourself or your position? And interestingly, most of them had a word. Someone said his word is kashmakash in Hindi. So he feels like he's pulled in two directions. Someone else, during his studies, he came across the word demi-monde. It's a French word and it means half worlds. And when he read it, he felt like, wow, that's me. Like I'm part of so many half worlds, but no world is fully my world, kind of. And yes, but these are a very short wrapping up of what I feel is important now. But right now I'm still in the middle of my research period or of my field time, and the analysis phase has not really completely begun yet. So thank you very much for your attention and yeah, for the opportunity to speak here. And now I'm happy to answer all of your questions. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Taniya, for a very interesting talk. So, people, if you have any questions, you can either type or you can raise your hand. Either is fine. Let me ask a question while others try to figure out what they want to talk about. So, one of the things which I realized when you talked about in between is something which I identify with, and that's because I spent a few years outside India, and now I'm back in India, and I kind of always have that feeling that I'm somewhere in between because I have not been able to completely shed whatever I gained when I was outside. I was in the US, uh, and then I sometimes I don't feel that I have a complete sense of belonging. But there are things which are really make me feel uh, that I really belong here. For example, the kind of camaraderie with colleagues that we have, or a simple thing like just collecting colleagues and walking to a chai thela and having a cup of tea, right? So those are the things which I really missed when I was there. And then there are times when I think about, okay, I'm so tired of sitting at home and working. I want to go and sit in a cafe and work. But then cafes in India are overcrowded. They're extremely loud, and or else you have to really price out all your peers, like go to a really hi-fi cafe, and then it seems like completely losing the point, and also not affordable all the time. So it was very interesting. I mean, your topic. So I think one set of people, maybe if you could include later, is different kinds of expats. I'm sure Delhi, in Gurgaon, there are a lot of these uh, software engineers who must have spent considerable amount of time outside, and now they are in India. And I'm sure many of them uh, would think they're in between, as you have put it. And of course, there are a lot of expat academicians in Delhi itself, right? So in AUD, for example, you don't even have to go anywhere else for that. So I guess that was one thing that came to my mind. So it's an observation, observation and suggestion. So not really a question.
And I think it's very true. So at some point, I also talked to a couple of language students, like which I knew from JNU, and they who had spent like 1 or 2 years in the country where they are learning the language. And a lot of them told me like when they came back, they were feeling this in between. They wanted to do things the way they have done it for like a couple of years. So I think that's definitely a set of people, like be it if you're an engineer and you go for work, or an academician or a language student or whatever. I think there this in between can also be felt. So it's very true. Thank you for that comment.
All right, there is a question. I'll just read out. The question is from Umesh Bakshi. What was the broader idea to start your research with, and how did you narrow it down to this specific topic and the people, communities involved?
I mean, as I said, it was an extensive topic search where it took me a lot of time to realize what I'm actually interested in, or I felt I'm always revolving around it, but I never can put my finger on what exactly interests me. So in that sense, I knew I wanted to work on like cultural differences, on differences in socialization, and how to navigate that. And it took me a long time to narrow it down. The colleagues in my center know that they had to read so many different things, like when I was not yet sure what exactly to work on. And I think it just became clear with reading more, understanding more what has been done and what has not been done. And also like the pre-study really helped me to understand when I was doing the pre-study, when I realized, okay, I'm really more interested in individuals. I could do the couples thing, but if I'm really honest with myself, I would have more fun. And I think I can contribute something better like on this part. And narrowing it down to these specific people, as I said, it was very difficult to find people who fitted the kind of idea of in between which was in my head. I talked to a lot of people, of course, way more than I've presented today, and I felt these were the best fitting ones. But since I got them over snowball sampling, so in that sense, it was a lot of luck. It was mostly someone who said, hey, I know this person, and I really think they are somehow in between. I have to ask them if they feel that too, because that was another difficulty. I met a couple of people who seemed very in between to me from the outside, from how they live their lives. But then I asked them, they were like, no, I don't feel in between at all. And I was like, okay, like I don't want to push that like that tag on you at all. So in that sense, it was a lot of luck and people who tipped me off to like, let's talk to that person. And I feel for all the individuals now I'm doing research with, this being in between is like it's a major life question or a major topic in their lives that have been there for so long. And now they get a chance to talk about it and reflect about it with someone else. So I think that was also one important thing. It's not a small period in their life. It has become a major topic of their whole lives, and questions of where do I belong and who am I? And yeah, I hope that answers.
Thank you, Taniya. Right. I'm sure there'll be more people. Anybody from the panel wants to ask something?
Radha, is it? Or
Yeah, may I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So Tanya, I was fascinated by your presentation, and also as someone who has been an in-between kind of person for long chunks of my life, I could relate to a lot of things you're saying. I've spent long chunks of my time in different parts of the world, so I could really relate to some of the issues you were raising. I was just wondering, the fact that you're located in Delhi and the fact that you are working with people here, where it's a kind of meeting ground where people from all kinds of places and backgrounds crisscross. Do you think that the experience or your study of in-betweenness would yield a different kind of perspective if you moved away from the urban setting and thought about, in-betweenness outside metropolitan space like this?
I definitely think that it would take on a different character. I think that's very true. I mean, part of why, apart from my personal connections to Delhi, why I found Delhi so like suiting for this topic is exactly that, because I feel like there is so many people migrating, coming from here and there, as you put it beautifully, crisscrossing here. On the one, I think it would be very different. But then again, I feel in the stories I find, right, I connect a little village in Bihar where one of them is from, or in Nainital or wherever, and Delhi, the new space. So there is this connection to the rural in a sense as well, or like the connection is built by the people who are like connecting these two places. And but I definitely think it would be different. But on the one hand, I'm very much focusing on introspection, right? On how they see their lives and reflect about it. And I think, like, since even in a rural setting, I would do that. So I'm not sure if maybe still something similar would come out. I'm unsure about it, but it's a valid question to ask. Thank you.
Rukmini, you had a question.
Not a question really, Taniya. Thank you so much for that presentation. I was thinking about two things. One is somewhere you said that you became more interested on the individual and wanted to look at individual biographies. That is what interested you. And yeah, I think that is what caught my attention, to a certain extent, given my own interest in reading autobiographies, which are written documents. And you said that you are interested in individual biographies, which you get through whatever in-depth interviews, spending time, etc. And you kind of added that you were interested in individual autobiographies rather than couples. Yeah. And I was just somehow trying to think that even in the individual biography, there is constantly this self and the other, the multiple selves that does come in. So I was just thinking, both methodologically, maybe for you to think or maybe comment on that a bit. So that was one thought. The other, thought was where you ended, which is what kind of words did you had the word in between, but did others also have this word? And I thought that was a very valuable, very, very important research, both research concept, research method kind of a thing that we start or we think about the research from a particular framing, but how is it that we explain that to others? Because, you know, when I was just thinking that when you were sure that you want to work on in between, but then you still had to explain to people what this is, and then you ended up hearing that everybody is in between. But then you also again had to come back and say that, no, I don't want your in between. I want some other in between, right? And then there is a way in which these people are saying that, you know, you are saying it's in between, but I think it's kashmakash. So this journey itself, you know, of starting with your understanding and then as if coming to their word around in between, I think that is also, I personally feel that there is some worth there for you to reflect on that as you you know, go ahead. So yeah, these two.
I think there also you helped me about, I think one of our talks gave me the idea to ask them about the words. So that is also thanks to you. And I think you are right that methodologically individuals and couples maybe wouldn't be that different. Like, also one thing which I realized, since a lot of my individuals get into a new context, right? So there, most of the time, there is one special individual that has, or several, who has introduced these people to this new context. So in that sense, at some point, I started asking them, like, who were important individuals that shaped you or shaped your preferences and taste, especially in your new context. And it was very interesting that they then gave me, some of them, their biographies through these other individuals. Maybe a teacher, maybe a friend, maybe a girlfriend or whatever. And that was quite interesting there to see that again, like, even though I'm looking at individuals, there are always relationships with other people like involved who are so guiding for their transformations or for shaping them basically, or their in-between position.
Thank you, Rukmini and Taniya, for the discussion. There is there are a couple of more questions. I'll read them out. Umesh, who had asked the question before, he has asked another question. Was there any criteria to find out the insights provided by the people you interviewed are precise or accurate enough in terms of them representing their community? So that's one question. Maybe you can address that, and then I can go to the next one.
I mean, that's a very difficult question. So, first of all, I don't have the expectation that these people really represent their community, right? Because I have not chosen Adil because he's a Muslim, or I have not chosen Suresh because he's a lower caste, but I have chosen him because I see this in between kind of thing. So that, and I think it's very clear that they actually do not completely represent their communities exactly because of that in between, because they don't fully ascribe to whichever you want to say today is their community. But so in that sense, no. And I think also precise and accurate are very scary terms for anyone working as qualitatively as I do, because I feel like in qualitative research, will there ever be a point where I feel like, okay, this is completely accurately or precisely, are they representing that community? So I don't think I have a certain, I don't know, I'm not sure I can answer these questions any better, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that does, because it makes sense that if you're talking about people who are in between, that becomes the main criteria of choice, and of course they would not always be representative of their respective communities. All right, Abhilasha asks a question. It's a broad question, but I'm curious to learn if you sense any reconciliation between loneliness on one end of the scale to in between, in the middle, and to finally feeling a sense of belongingness on the other hand of the scale. how do you view friendships and affinities that are built on the in-between positions?
Very interesting question, and very interesting, will be very interesting for me to further think about. Maybe what is the easiest to answer is the friendships and affinities that are built on this in-between position. That is a very interesting thing that I realized how, let's call them in-between people, although I'm not very happy with this term, how they gravitate towards other in-between people. For example, a good example is there's this one older German lady of this Swagat group I've talked about, and she keeps telling me she has a nephew who is adopted. He comes from Africa and has been adopted by German parents. And he keeps telling me how she feels like this connectedness with him, because in her eyes, like, he is also in between, like her, and she feels this parallels. And I've noticed that many times that people seem to gravitate towards each other, maybe because like that this affinity to the in between is something that does that. Or I think also when I am researching them, because I'm in several, also in parts in my country, like in several ways in between, that kind of also helps them to connect with me, or helps me connecting with them. So I definitely think that there is something there. I'm not sure. In many ways, like, it's very interesting how you put it up with loneliness in between, and then we have full belonging, basically. But for some reason, I would rather put the in between and the loneliness together, because, or that's what I've noticed so far. But if I do my further analysis, maybe something else will come out. But I rather see it like that they feel lonely because they are in between, because there is no full belonging. To that part, I completely agree. There is no full belonging, but I don't think there was a state of loneliness before, and now they are in between, half half, and there's full belonging. It's rather there was some kind of belonging, or maybe already some thoughts that they couldn't agree with certain things, or always wanted something else from themselves, but for themselves. But then I rather feel this in between, when once they transformed, they started to be really lonely, because there were very few people who could understand both. So I would put that together somehow, but to be honest, I have to think more about it, and it's a very interesting question. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. At this point, I don't see anybody else. Let's give them some time. Can I take a couple of minutes to just point out or to just place two suggestions, right? So one is that especially in the COVID times, when physical interaction got difficult, did you come across any social media where these people were, like, the in-between people had formed a group, and they were kind of trying to talking with each other or negotiating, sharing their stories about negotiating life from the positionality where they were. And probably it's a good idea to look at uh, some of the virtual spaces. I know it would become a virtual ethnography and not a physical one, but that's something that probably as an expansion, I don't think it can also be included in your PhD work. That was one thing. And then the second thing that I thought was, like, whenever I think about my in-betweenness, I think it's always the trying to find a balance between the two states, right? Having best of both the worlds, or being neither here nor there. There's a saying in Hindi, which I'm sure Rukmini will explain to you, na ghar ka na ghat ka, which, so how do, I mean, but I'm sure that the in-between position also has other, can be explored through other dimensions as well, rather than just a trade-off between finding best of both worlds, or feeling neither here nor there kind of thing. So would you be able to look at such kind of trade-off? That's one. That's another one.
Maybe in response to the first thing, so of course, the Swagat group has a WhatsApp chat where they are very active every day. So there it was easy for me to also sometimes participate in discussions. But about the other people, they don't know each other, right? So they might connect to 7 other people because they're in between in their individual spaces, but not among each other. So in that sense, there I of course did like Zoom meetings or we did calls or stuff like that was happening, but like nothing further. But I think it's definitely a good idea to look on this a bit more, especially if another lockdown is approaching. And the other point is very true. I think you pointed it out very well, like this the best of both worlds, and at the same time sometimes like you're like nowhere really, kind of nowhere at all. And I feel one thing which I also realized, and I'm still trying to figure it out in my head, but for a lot of people, you have to think that they have lived in this in between space now for decades, like this position, right? So I think for a lot of people, it's not this moving anymore. It's more like it has become normalized. And they even the not only the being in one world or the other, but the being in between has found a certain normalization, and there are only these small moments of rupture where it's again ripped open, where again they're like, actually I don't belong nowhere, or actually there's this. But to me it seems that some of the people are still shifting a lot, but these are people for whom it's relatively new, let's say only a couple of years that they have been in between. But especially if you look at the German ladies who have been in between for 40 years, so for them, it's very, very few moments where it actually rips open and actually these questions and reflections come to the forefront again. So in that sense, I'm not sure yet how to understand it. I'm still researching it and I'm trying to understand it. But to me, it seems like a process that starts somewhere and then suddenly you transform, you realize this alienation when you go back and you realize, okay, I'm now in this in-between state. But at some point, it just becomes normal because you can't not question it every day, right? So I feel definitely that more thinking of I have to do more thinking on that part and thinking of different dimensions, as you said. I think, yeah, that's necessary.
Okay. Thank you, Tanya. That was very interesting. There is one more question. I guess we could take that. It's from Dr. Prasad. Could this be a comparative study of in-betweenness in Europe and India? More of a suggestion than a question, perhaps. A very interesting research topic when the world is really becoming small.
Very interesting question indeed. And I thought about it in the beginning. Like I thought about it if that could be done. And of course, I've been thinking about this a lot in the sense that if I would have done this study and looked at trying to find people in between here in my own country, wouldn't that have been very different? And I'm convinced that the kind of in-betweens in India are very different, especially in a place like Delhi, that there are way more markers or dimensions like caste and stuff in the region, which are so important, which don't exist in the same way in my home. So these questions of if the in-between would have seemed very different to me if I would have done this study in my home, that's definitely a question that I'm asking myself a lot. Right now, I am convinced that this would probably be too much for a PhD because already it's a very extensive work. Like, I meet each of these people twice a week. So it's in for long hours and long conversations. And so I think if I really would want to do it comparatively, I would need at least another 5 years of a PhD maybe. But the idea itself, I find very interesting. Yeah.
Okay. There is one more question from Ashwin. Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting topic. I was thinking about the various disruptions you mentioned to your fieldwork, especially caused by the pandemic. I was wondering how you reflect on such disruptions from a methodological point of view.
I mean, there's actually several things that I've reflected on about. I mean, one thing is when you're in the field and you're doing research, you're so involved, right? Sometimes, or I feel like I don't see the big pictures anymore. Like in German, we say, I don't see the forest because I can see only trees. So that's how I felt a lot of time. And since my research was like, there were a lot of ruptures when I was going back home for different reasons. that was in a way methodologically sometimes good because it took me out of that space and with some distance. And when I then looked at my interviews again, some things occurred to me that in that space of where I was so involved in these lives that couldn't occur to me there. So methodologically, I think in some ways it was good for me. Then again, I think the strange ways that how a pandemic or how a huge crisis like this brings people closer together way faster than I would than under normal circumstances. So I felt this a lot. Of course, we helped each other during the pandemic, organized like helped each other and all of that. So that also, of course, brought us closer on a personal level. Else methodologically, I'm not sure yet, and I feel there will be. I mean, I know many PhD researchers who are now at the same stage as I am and whose fieldwork has been equally impacted by COVID. So I think there will a whole new strand will come out of like how different people reflect on how that has like I don't know has affected it. So in that sense, I think I still need to think about it before I write up, but that's as much as I can say as of now.
Thank you for your response. I guess we could stop here. I don't see any other questions. I'm sure people will email as they continue thinking about your topic from their own perspective as well. So thank you, Taniya, for taking time to prepare presentation and present this very interesting topic to us. It certainly helped us to think about our own positionalities as well. So it's kind of very interesting from that point of view. So thanks a lot. Thank you, Taniya. Thanks, Rukmini, for making all this possible, for your mentorship. I thank all the IID team. Well, it's like thanking myself as well. So I thank the IT team especially for putting this link and everything together in such a short notice. So I really I thank for the support. And all of the attendees who made this event possible and also participated by asking questions. As we all know, these webinars, seminars, everything, they are enriched only with more discussion and questions. Otherwise, there is no point in having these kind of events. So I'm sure we all took something from this event, and hopefully we would have Taniya again present the progress at a later stage in her work, and we look forward to that. Thank you. Thank you all. So I guess I will end this session now.
Thank you.
Keep an eye on IID emails. We will arrange more interesting talks in future. All right. Thank you, Taniya.
Thank you very much for the comments and everything.
Thank you, Radha. Thank you, Rukmini.
Bye,
Thank you.
Radha.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.